Ladies and gentlemen, how the bloody hell are we? And welcome back to part 4 of our poly guide, the most in-depth guide to poly resin repairs anywhere on the internet. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at laminations, including laminating over paint, which is particularly useful for poly boards because most poly boards with color, if they're not resin tint, will be paint beneath glass. We'll also show why it is useful that poly laminating resin remains tacky and sticky to allow us to put, for instance, in today's video, more lamination on top of previous lamination, and we can just stack material on top of one another with no sanding required in between. We'll start to have a look at our sanding resin, including using the same batch of sanding resin for 3 separate use cases, all at different stages of repair, but all requiring that sanding resin still. Today's video is a big one. It is an hour long, so break out your pads and your pencils. It goes pretty in depth. This is the longest episode of the entire series, but this one I really struggled to find a way to break it in half and make another episode out of it. It all kind of comes together at the end, and so unfortunately it does need to be long. If you can't make it through the full hour, just pause it halfway and revisit it again tomorrow. As per usual, if you have any comments, any questions in particular, feel free to leave them down below and I will always answer you. I'll always get back to you and answer those questions and those comments. Don't forget, we are running the raffle during the release of this series, and the prizes for that raffle will come from here in Shapers Collective. So be sure to read the pinned comment on this video or any other video from this series, and you can follow the instructions from there. There'll be more on that later on in the video. Well, this video is already long enough, so I'm going to leave it there and let's get on with it. Enjoy, guys. I hope it's helpful. See you in the next one. So as we've discussed, with most poly boards, we are going to have paint beneath our fiberglass, and so when we're repairing poly boards, we do the same thing. We put that paint underneath the fiberglass. So this board has been filled with our sanding resin. The rail has been sanded to shape, and now we are up to our laminating stage. But being a black board and having a big bald patch in the rail is not ideal. So before we laminate, we are going to replace this black paint, and then we'll put our cloth over the top. So we only need the paint on one side of the board. The other rail is fine and there was no major damage that took colour away, just cracking in the glass. So we need to replace our paint here. Now the key thing with painting under fiberglass is that our paint has to be entirely covered with fiberglass. If we paint to here and then we only fiberglass to here, when we go to sand it, we're going to sand away our paint that's not beneath fiberglass, and then it's going to make a weird paint edge which will stand out. So what we want to do is paint to here and then glass to about here, and then we can do our resin coat to here, and that way we can sand as hard as we want, but we're never going to touch the paint job. So we're not going to have a weird edge, we're going to have a nice blend between our colour and the original colour. Now, of course, the area here is sanded with 120 grit, and that's a good grit for fiberglass to adhere to. So what we don't want to do is paint this so heavily that we fill up all of those 120 scratches, and now our fiberglass cloth has nothing to grab. So we only want to apply just enough paint to cover our bald areas, but no more than necessary. We want the thinnest coat we can possibly get away with. Now again, remembering I don't really want my paint to go past here so that my cloth can come to about here. So we're going to start here and work our way that way. The damage is a little more obvious on this side, so we're probably going to need a little bit more paint, but again, as little as possible. And that's going to be that. And we want this paint to be touch dry, but you're still a little bit scared to touch it because it might also be wet. We don't want it cured. If the paint cures, then we're going to have to sand it again so that the resin adheres to it. And if we sand it, we're going to ruin our paint job. So we want it touch dry, but scary touch dry, not comfortable touch dry.
Hij werkt niet.
I hope that makes sense. We have some more damage on this board down by the tail. We have one in the middle here, and of course we have the nose. So my general rule is, by the time I cut all of my fiberglass cloth, the paint will be perfect or perfectly tacked off, ready to cloth. In the case of this board, our only damage is to the rails of the board. This area and the same on the deck side is fine. So we're going to go with a 4-ounce cloth because we're going to double wrap these rails anyway. So we're going to do a patch on this side and a patch on the other side, both patches wrapping the rails. So we don't need a heavy gauge cloth in this area because there is no damage. And so we're going to end up with only 4 ounces of cloth here, but on the rails, because it's double wrapped, it's going to be 8 ounces. You'll notice that we haven't cut the cloth straight across the board from rail to rail. We never want to do that. So we've cut it into a tidy little triangle. That's just so we're not creating a crease or a snapping point. It's very unlikely a board ever snaps in this pattern. It always snaps in that pattern.
I hear he went hot ripper.
He went bad shredder, yeah? He busted sticky shred so bad.
Of course, the most important thing is we have our paint here and our paint edge here, so our cloth needs to cover all of that paint by a substantial amount. You can see our paint is here and our cloth ends up here. So that's really important. A couple of other small areas on the board. We have this small hole here which was solar resed. So while we've got the board, we may as well just put some cloth over it. And we have our tail end here, which has a shatter here and a shatter here. We're going to do this one a little bit differently. So I actually just answered a question in regards to tails and the way I glassed them on a live stream last night. But this is a good opportunity to show what I was talking about. So you're probably aware that the tail end of a board, more often than not, has a sharp or a hard edge. Now this sharp edge isn't shaped into the foam of the board. This sharp edge is shaped into the resin when it's finally glassed. So glassing the tail of a fully completed board is very different to glassing the tail of a shaped blank. You can see that hard, sharp edge to the rail there. That's designed to release water. So the water doesn't wrap it, it releases, and that allows us to push the tail out in turns. As we move up the board, you'll notice that hard edge disappears and it becomes a nice round rail. So we're round, round, and now our hard edge begins to appear. Earlier we spoke about air bubbles under cloth, and a surefire way to get air bubbles is by trying to wrap fiberglass cloth around a 90-degree angle. Depending how sharp our shaper or glasser has made this edge, sometimes you can get away with it, but the only way to really know is to do it. And there's, say, a 70-30 chance, 70% chance you're going to end up with air bubbles, 30% chance that you won't.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
So because of that, whenever I'm glassing tails with hard edges, which is going to be 90% of boards that you glass, a lot of long boards will have rounded rails on their tail, but most boards will have this hard edge. I mask that hard edge off, and then I cloth the bottom of the board. When this resin has kicked, we'll cut that cloth away, flip the board over, and then we'll glass the bottom side, wrapping the cloth to this masking edge. So we're going to have 2 layers of cloth that meet on that 90-degree angle. Again, I hope that makes sense, but we're about to witness it all unfold anyway, so I'm sure it will as you see it. We're just going to cut this cloth into a more reasonable shape than this. Now this is not a tip for poly specifically, but a tip for all glassing. You'll notice that whenever I glass, I don't have any sharp corners. I've rounded them off. So this one is like an oval. We have this smaller patch up here, which is a straight circle. And then I haven't finished this one yet to show you what I mean, but you can see there's quite a sharp point here and a sharp point here where it's going to sit like that, but we're going to round them off to look more like this one here. You know, when you go into an op shop, or as you Yankee Doodles call them, a thrift store, and you look at old furniture that's clearly come from a child's bedroom, maybe some bedside drawers, and they're covered in yucky children's stickers that have dirt on it that's older than me and are all peeling and lifting. Disgusting. One of my biggest phobias is old, dirty, peeling stickers. The thing that you'll notice with these old, dirty, peeling stickers, though, is that they're all peeling from the corners. They're not peeling from the middle of the sticker. And if you have a look at any round stickers that don't have corners, you'll notice that it's unlikely that they're peeling at all. So for that reason, when I am cutting fiberglass patches, I always try to cut in circles or ovals. I don't want any corners in my cloth, because if there's ever going to be any sort of cloth lifting down the track and damage to my repair, it is probably all going to start with a sharp corner in my lamination. Now again, on the subject of air bubbles, we talked about fin boxes and that kind of high lip that they have and the risk for air bubbles there. So we have a box installed here but not yet laminated, so I can show you exactly what I mean by that. You can see now that the box has been installed, we have this high lip that is higher than the surface of our surfboard.
Do you actually understand what true focus even is?
And this will be sanded away eventually, but there it is right there. Once the board's all laminated and resin coated, then we'll sand it down flat. This edge though is a 90-degree corner, just like our hard rail we've just spoken about. So wrapping the cloth up and around a 90-degree corner is a very easy way to get bubbles. So if you want, after this, you can go and look at your boards at home and check the fin boxes and see if there are any air bubbles along that edge. That is the hardest part of installing a fin box, not getting air bubbles along that 90-degree edge. Alright, with our cloth cut and our edges rounded, we are ready to laminate. So, have a guess, what type of resin are we going to be using for laminating? Are we going to be using sanding resin or laminating resin? I think you can get this one. So I've got just shy of 30 mils here for our laminating. So if we were making sanding resin and we wanted 2% of our wax additive, that would be 18 drops. So 1% is going to be half of 18, which is what, 9? So let's go with 9 drops of catalyst. Actually, it's quite warm in here, so we might go with a little bit less. We'll go with 7 drops of catalyst. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Probably around the 26-degree mark in the shed right now. And then of course we are going to mix with a clean stick for 40 seconds. Don't forget that during the release of all of these episodes, during this series, we're doing our first ever giveaway to celebrate 6,000 subscribers to the Small Kind Ding Repairs channel. We're essentially running a raffle, and the winner of the raffle will go home, or get sent, I guess, a bunch of cool shit from Shapers Collective, which is the showroom next door. The more people that enter this raffle, the bigger the prize at the end is going to be. And if enough people enter, maybe we can even split prizes across first and second, or first, second, third, something along those lines. Whether you're from outside of New Zealand or inside of New Zealand, if you're a member, a subscriber, or you just happen to have stumbled across this video, you're more than welcome to enter the raffle. There's a bunch of cool Kiwi products in Shapers Collective, and for a lot of you, it's probably going to be pretty hard to get your hands on outside of this raffle. So there's a golden opportunity here for you to get your hands on some pretty cool stuff. You'll find all the details for this competition in the pinned comment underneath this video, or any of the other episodes to this series. They'll all have that same pinned comment with all the instructions and the details you need on how to enter the raffle. So we're actually laminating 2 boards right now, the 2 Flanagans. So we've got this one that we painted, and we've got this fin box we looked at. When glassing multiple dings at a time, I'm always going to start with the most complicated of patches first and leave the simplest to last. Because that'll mean as our resin begins to gel, we'll only be left with really easy patches we can do very quickly,
as opposed to one like this where we have to wrap the rails and get it all neat and tidy. It's a little bit harder, so we'll do that at the start. So in the beginning, I'm just trying to wet the cloth out. If I push really hard right now to drag this resin around, I'll move the cloth, and I don't want to move the cloth. So I just am softly dragging the resin around, getting as much of the cloth wet out as I can, and getting it stuck down to the surface. The more of the cloth is wet out and stuck to the surface, then I can start pushing a little bit harder and wiping off that excess resin. Wet out this rail here. Try not to waste too much resin because we still have quite a few dings to go. So our main goal right now still is just getting all that cloth wet out and into place. Don't want any dry patches. Okay, so our rails are wrapped, our cloth is wet out, so now we can start wiping harder and pulling off any excess resin. Remember, we want the surface nice and flat. We don't want lumps of resin and little hills and valleys. We're trying to make the area as flat as possible. It's also not so much in the case of dings, but if we were laminating this entire board, the more resin you leave on the surface, the heavier it will be. So by pulling off excess resin, we're making a lighter lamination as well. But in the case of dings, that's not really a factor. So our next complicated lamination is going to be the fin box, not because we have to wrap rails or anything like that, only because of that risk of air bubbles. We might need a little bit of extra time just to work those air bubbles out. Now this box was installed with laminating resin as well, not sanding resin. So after the install, we can just go right ahead and laminate. And our resin that we're applying now is going to adhere perfectly fine to any resin left over from the install. I will show you what I mean by the risk of air bubbles. Let's get this cloth wet out first. That's step number one. Of course, we don't want to add way too much resin while we're wetting out, but remember, we're going to be removing all of the excess as a final step, so you can add more than you need. So here at the back of the box, we have an air bubble. If I pull the cloth this way, away from the box, I'm actually going to create more air bubbles. So what we want to do to fix them is push into the box, like this. We can have air bubbles up here above our masking tape, but we don't want air bubbles above the box. Now that we're air bubble free, we can wipe off our excess resin, making our repair as flat as possible. Then our easiest repairs. We've already done this little one here while you guys weren't watching, but we've got the tail. This one is super straightforward because it's just a flat patch. Same steps, dragging it very lightly so we're not moving our cloth out of position. And then as it's wetting out, we can start pushing a little bit harder to get rid of that excess, giving us a nice flat lamination. Now that was basically the perfect amount of catalyst. Our resin is turning into jelly as we speak. Right as I finish this last patch, we've turned into jelly. So it's now unworkable, unusable. So we know that our resin has gelled in the cup, so we're going to leave this maybe 10 or 15 minutes. We could leave it longer, but I think that's all it will require. And then we'll flip this board over and we're going to laminate the other side of this nose and the other side of that tail. And we have to let our cloth set up and kind of cure a little bit with this one because of course we have to cut out this patch on the tail from the rail so that we're able to wrap the other side. And the risk of putting cloth over cloth too early, so we're going to end up flipping this board over, putting more cloth on the other side of this board and wrapping the rail here. If the resin hasn't cured enough, we run the risk of moving this cloth that we've just put down when we're wiping out our new cloth that we're about to put on. So we want to make sure this lamination coat has cured pretty well so that we can wipe our new cloth really hard and not worry about moving or lifting this cloth. Having a look at our Flanagan box here, you can see that there are no air bubbles above the white of the fin box, but there are air bubbles above the masking tape. So these air bubbles are caused by air trapped beneath the fiberglass cloth, as opposed to air bubbles trapped within deep pores of resin, like in the case of our King here. Important to know the difference in these different type of air bubbles. Okay, our resin has kicked off, so we can now cut this excess cloth away. In all honesty, this is my favorite thing to do. This is the most satisfying part of the job. Watch this, it's the best. Oh, so satisfying. Pull our tape, we'll rip it one or the other, and then we'll just tidy it up a little bit if it needs it. Alright, now we'll flip her over and we'll laminate the other side. Now we're starting to discover the benefits of poly laminating resin remaining sticky or tacky after curing. You can see where we've wrapped our cloth over the rails, and now we're going to laminate this side and wrap those rails again. And because this lamination that we've just done is remaining sticky because it's laminating resin and not sanding resin, we're able to laminate straight over the top of it. We don't need to sand it or key the surface for our next batch of laminating resin to adhere. Now, if we had any really crazy high spots that are going to create air bubbles beneath our next layer of cloth, we could quickly sand them to bring them down. There's kind of two noticeable spots on this nose right at the tip. We have one just there and one just there. You can see they're a little bit higher than the surface of the board. This is incredibly difficult to film. I almost need a macro lens, but there's a little lip of cloth just there that I can kind of get under, and same on this side. It's a little bit high. So we're going to give them a tiny little sand just to bring them down a little bit so that when we put our cloth over next, we don't end up with a little air bubble there and there. So all I've got is a piece of cedar, an old piece of 80 grit. You can use some 120 grit as well. We're just going to wrap it like that. And we're not going to go crazy and feather edges and things here. We're just going to bust down that high bit just a little bit. That's it, we're done, no more. We've just got this side to go now. There's a little high spot there, so same thing. that's it, we're done. Any loose strands you have, like this or here, you can see a few strands I've pulled out of the cloth along here. They don't matter. You don't have to sand them. We're going to glass straight over the top of them. Remember that our laminating resin is still sticky. So the more we sand and the more aggressively we sand, the more dust we create and the more chance we have of that dust sticking to our lamination that we've just done. And once that dust is stuck to the lamination, you'll never get it out.
Oh, shoot.
So we want to sand gently and as little as humanly possible. So we're going to mix more laminating resin. We don't need much this time because we don't have the fin box and we don't have the little ding. So this is like 10 ml of resin. And for our 10 ml of resin, 2% would be 6 drops. So 1% is going to be 1, 2, 3 drops. And that's it. It's pretty hot in here, so that's probably going to kick quite fast. And then of course we mix for 40 seconds. So on this layer, we don't really have to worry about the cloth moving, because remember our first layer of laminating resin is sticky still, so it's actually holding the cloth in place. We could push as hard as we want here, and we wouldn't be able to move this cloth because it's stuck to the last lamination we did. So we're not working on any details right now. If there's any air bubbles, we ignore them. Our only goal right now is to get the cloth all wet. We don't want to see any white. Once our rails are wet out, then we can tuck them under. Get this one tucked under. So now all of our rails are wet out and tucked under, so now we can focus on pulling off any excess resin from our lamination. Any lumps and bumps. Keep your eyes open for any air bubbles that we might have to just squeeze out. There's a couple just there. And then this one, we're going to just start by smearing some excess resin on there. It can stick into place. We don't have to hold it. Kind of put that in position. Oh, and look at that. Our resin has gelled. So we're done for. So we're going to be really quick right now. I'm not going to film it, but I'm going to mix up more. So that was 10 mils with 3 drops of catalyst, and it went off very quickly. It's 27 degrees Celsius in this shed, so it is quite hot. So this is more like 5 mils of resin, but still with 3 drops of catalyst. So this is going to go off even quicker, but this is the last patch we have to laminate, so that's fine. We'll have plenty of time. So we're going to wet this out, and then what we can do is we can test how sharp this hard edge is, and we'll try and wrap this cloth under. So if you guys weren't here watching me, this is how I'd leave it. I would laminate it like that, and I would leave this little curtain just hanging there, and then we can cut it or sand it off once we've applied our sanding resin over all this. But we're going to try and wrap it under, and let's see if we get air bubbles. If we can't beat the air bubbles, say it's got lots of air bubbles now, then we can just pull it back and leave it like that. But let's give it a go, and we might be able to get it. Remember that it's laminating resin on the bottom side, so our cloth that we're applying now is going to stick just fine to the bottom. This may not show up on camera very well, but right there is an air bubble, and along here we have a few air bubbles. but they're not too bad. You can probably fight them. Our laminating resin has kicked off, so we are ready for our sanding coat on both the tail and the nose of this Flanagan and the thin box of this Flanagan. Double Flanagan, what are the odds? It's actually the same owner of both boards, so the odds are pretty good. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is a long video, so here we have the intermission. Feel free to go make a coffee, go grab a beer, go take a leak, or just pause the video and you can start again tomorrow and you know exactly where you left off. In the meantime, I'm going to play you a little tune on the guitar. Enjoy. Are you a person who owns a surfboard and has damaged that surfboard and are looking for ways to fix your surfboard without just going the Uncle Tony method and filling it full of some gnarly product like carbog or resin and micro balloons? Maybe you're one of the many people who have messaged me over the years with photos of your damaged surfboard asking, hey, how do I go about fixing this in the proper manner? Maybe you've already started fixing your surfboard, but you're not quite sure what to do next. You're stuck at a particular stage. Well, do I have something that may interest you? The fact that you're here watching this video tells me that you're someone who is a surfer and does want some help in fixing your own surfboard. And I've always been here to help you guys, and that's what this channel is all about. Allow me then to introduce you guys to a product that I've created to help you along that journey and make it a little bit easier. Small Kind Ding Repairs has a new clothing line, so this, of course,
course, is a hoodie. We all know what a hoodie looks like, but this hoodie is a little bit different. On the back of this hoodie is basically my autobiography, but it is essentially a checklist of how to fix a poly surfboard. All of these stages are going to be covered and featured in this series that you're watching right now. From prep to fill to skim to sand to paint to laminate to resin to sand to resin to wet sand and finally to polish. Now you could simply buy this hoodie and pin it to the wall of your shed or whatever space it is you're repairing boards in and keep this as your own little personal checklist. Or of course you could wear it while you're repairing your surfboard, and at each stage you could just take the hoodie off and read the back of it and you know exactly where you're up to in your repair process. Oh man, what am I gonna do with this thing? I know. Being a surfer though, maybe it's too warm for a hoodie where you're at, so that's why we also have t-shirts with the same checklist on the back. Or maybe you're the type of person who likes ultra light surfboards so that you can do incredible aerial maneuvers in the water. And if you're that person, then for you, we have here the epoxy repair checklist. This one's a little bit longer, but essentially we sand, we fill, we sand, we skim, we sand, we laminate, we sand, we resin, we wet sand, we paint, we wet sand, and we polish. But Uncle Small Kind Dings, I love doing incredible aerial maneuvers in the water, but I also live in a cold area. I've got your back, mate, because here we have the hoodie version of the epoxy repair checklist. We got every base covered. Whether you live somewhere warm and you require a t-shirt, or you live somewhere cold and you require a hoodie, Small Kind Dings has all of the options you require for your local climate and whatever type of repairs it is that you're trying to do. Between this YouTube channel and these hoodies and shirts, you now have no excuses at all to be fixing your dings like an Uncle Tony. So if this series or any one of my videos in the past has been helpful for you and you'd like to support the channel and also let the world know that you're not just another Uncle Tony filling surfboards with car bog, you'll find these shirts and hoodies by going to the description of this video and following the link to the Small Kind Ding Repairs shop. Not only will you find these fine garments in that shop, but you'll also find a catalogue of other things that you most certainly need. So after you've watched this episode, feel free to go to the shop, have a peruse, and spend your money. We're going to mask off our rails, but we're going to make sure once we start getting to the thinner part of the rail, we're going to tuck that tape underneath the rail, not at the thin apex. So you can see back here, we've taped right in the middle of the rail at that apex, but as we come up closer to the nose, we run our tape underneath the board. That's because by the time we're done with both of our resin coats, top and bottom, there's going to be a line here where the resin has met the masking tape on the top pour and the bottom pour, and we're going to have to sand that line away. It's going to require more sanding than everywhere else. Now that's fine down here, but as we come up here to this incredibly thin rail and the tip of the nose, if we were to over sand there, we're going to sand through really easily. So by wrapping the tape under the board, we're going to be sanding on the flat of the board, not on this pointy rail where it's going to sand through really easily. For our tail patch here, all we're going to do is put masking tape flat on the bottom, and we want it just poking out from the rail. We're actually going to tear it here. And put a new piece here. We don't want too much masking tape sticking out, just a little bit.
Our fin box here doesn't require any masking. This is good to go. You can see I've sanded quite a large area, much bigger than the fiberglass patch. Our tape goes all the way to the end of that. Maybe touch up a little bit just there. So now we're mixing sanding resin, and we're going to need a little more than 30 mil, which is the amount that these cups hold. So we're actually going to use the scales, and we're probably going to mix more like 60 or 70 mil. This resin comes out of this tap pretty quick, so we'll see which one we get to. 70 mil. It's actually more like 80 mil. Went a little bit over, but that's all right. So that's going to give us 48 drops total. 6 drops for every 10 mil. Now I happen to know that each one of my pipettes holds about 20 drops total. So for the catalyst, I'm just going to go, boom, 1 pipette. That's roughly 20 drops. So 48 drops of wax additive, 20 drops-ish of catalyst. And then how long are we going to mix it for? You guessed it, 40 seconds. So we can start with our fin box. Now there's kind of 2 goals when you're doing a resin coat like this. The first is to cover any laminating resin. We can't sand until all of the laminating resin becomes sandable. So any laminating resin we want to cover with our sanding resin. And then of course our second goal is to try and spread that resin out and make the area as flat and level as possible. We're going to use a little bit of finesse here. I don't really want to go beyond our black line, but I haven't masked it, so we're just going to hand paint it. Doesn't matter if I go a little bit over, but as little as possible. Now, always do an area like a deck side of a nose last, because the rocker is obviously going back that way towards the middle of the board. And so if we apply our resin first to this ding and then go and do all the others, it just gives that resin time to run too far that way. Whereas now we're up to the last ding. Our resin should be kicking soon, so we don't have to worry about it running beyond where we've sanded. Our sanding coat is applied, nice and smooth, nice and even, so now we can let that kick off. Pull that masking tape and we'll do the other side.
"20 minutes later."
Alright, we're now ready to flip this purple Flanagan over, and we are going to resin coat our laminations on the underside of the board. But before we do that, we have a couple of other boards that are going to require the same sanding resin, so we're going to prep them so that we can pour them all at once. Well, the first one is this red fish. We're not going to follow along with this, but you can see I need foam for the fin box, but our tail is quite damaged. So of course we're going to fill that with sanding resin, being a lot of dings, but relatively small dings. So because it takes the same resin, we'll mask this up and we'll pour that resin on here at the same time. But our most important one is this yellow Flanagan. So this box is ready to be sanded now and opened up. It's going to require quite a bit of sanding, and I'm almost guaranteed to expose fiberglass weave when I do that process. So it's more than likely that this board is going to need one more final coat, sort of a gloss coat of sanding resin. So we're going to sand that and open it now, and then we'll pour that one, and that one all at the same time. As expected, we have exposed fiberglass weave around the edges, and I'll try and put a shot in of this before it was sanded, and you'll notice that our cloth edges were slightly higher than our resin. So because our cloth edges were higher than our resin, it was guaranteed we were going to expose weave like that. So that's all right, we've sanded everything nice and smooth and flat now, not just the box but our repair patch as well. So now we're going to give it one final gloss coat of sanding resin. This problem of your cloth edge being higher than your resin coat and then eventually showing weave when you initially sand it is quite common. So with poly repairs, you can expect to have to do a sanding coat and a gloss coat as well. It's not uncommon. It definitely depends on which area of the board you're working on. A big flat open space, a rail, a tail, a fin box. It is definitely possible to get away with only one resin coat. Sometimes you need two, sometimes you need one. It's going to depend how good you are at applying resin, how good you are at sanding, and like I said, the area of the board that you're working on. Even with our purple Flanagan here, you can see my cloth is slightly higher than my resin pour, so it's not unlikely that I will expose some weave there. This will show particularly on black. Black shows up pretty much any indiscrepancy, so if I have to do a second resin coat on this, I wouldn't be surprised. Same down here on the tail, you can see our cloth here is slightly higher than our resin coat, so I'm probably going to expose some weave there, and on that black it'll show up. If the board were white, it wouldn't matter at all. You probably wouldn't even see it. If we have a look at this area though, our resin coat covers that cloth edge pretty perfectly, so it's unlikely I'll expose weave there. If I had managed to do my entire lamination like that, it would probably only require one resin coat. Think about it like this. Your primary goal with that first sanding coat that we've done is to build the resin up as high as possible and as close to the height of the cloth or the lamination as you can possibly get it. Then when you sand that resin, you're basically trying to sand everything as flat as possible and blend and feather it all into the existing undamaged part of the board. Our second resin coat though, which we're going to call our gloss coat, it doesn't have to be as thick or as high as that initial sanding coat because we've now sanded the entire area flat. So the only thing that this resin coat is going to do is to cover that cloth weave that we've exposed in our sanding and give us something that we can gloss up with the polisher, sand nicely, polish and finish the board with. My general rule when it comes to sanding is if we're going to sand and then pour a coat of resin, we're going to sand with 120. If we don't have another coat of resin to pour, then we want to start our sanding as fine as possible. So once we've got this gloss coat on, we're then going to begin our final sand at 320. So because 320 is such a fine grit in comparison to 120, we want our resin coat that we're about to pour here to be as smooth, as flat, as perfect as possible, so it requires the least amount of sanding, because we're not going to have a big gnarly sanding grit to take out all the indiscrepancies. So we want no indiscrepancies. So here we have 50 ml of sanding resin. Of course, we have 30 drops of our wax additive to make it the sanding resin, and we've put 6 drops of catalyst in. It's quite hot in the shed at the moment, and we're going to use this same sanding resin for 3 different stages of repair. So our first stage, as already mentioned, is our gloss coat, and this is going to require a really thin layer of resin. We have no lumps or bumps or defects to fix with this resin. We are only making the area tidy, neat, hiding the weave of that cloth. And the last thing we want to do is we want to get rid of all of our 120 scratches, or as many as we possibly can. We're going to bring this resin as close to the edge of the area we've been sanding as possible, because remember, we're going to start our final sand once this resin has cured with 320. We're going to skip 240. So we want to fill as many of the 120 scratches as possible so that we're just starting with fresh resin. So that's our gloss coat with this sanding resin. Next we're going to do our sanding coat on the purple Flanagan. So this coat is going to be much thicker. It can be much messier because we're going to sand this really hard with our 120, because we're going to have to bring down edges of cloth, we're going to have to feather. So you want it as neat as possible, but it doesn't have to be as perfect as the gloss coat, because we're going to start our sanding with quite a coarse grit. And we want that resin as high as the fiberglass cloth in a perfect world. If our fiberglass cloth here is 1 millimeter above the surface of the board, then we want our resin coat to be 1 millimeter above the surface of the board. Maybe 1.5 millimeters. On a flat area like this, that's going to be much easier to achieve. There's no rocker, our resin isn't going to run away as it cures. We should be able to get our resin to cover this cloth entirely. We're dealing with a little bit of rocker here on the tail, so our resin is going to run a little bit towards the tail, but we should be able to cover our cloth pretty well with this coat. And our third use case for this batch of sanding resin is we're going to decant a little bit into one of our little cups. We're going to add a little bit of red pigment. Not trying to match the color perfectly or anything like that. We're just putting, it's a red board, so it's going to get red resin. That's it. Color matching resin and pigments is very difficult, much harder than paint. And that brings us to our third use case for this batch of sanding resin, which is to fill the initial damage before lamination. Better to have too much and sand away the excess than to not have enough and have to do another pour. That's it. That is one batch of sanding resin and 3 different use cases for that one batch. So the thing that all of those boards have in common, of course, is that their next stage, once this resin pour has cured, is going to be requiring sanding. Our fin box with the gloss coat will require a final sand. Our purple board will require a sand to bring our cloth down to level and flatten our repair out. And of course, the red fishtail, that's going to need sanding in order to shape it and get it ready for lamination. So all of them are on different stages. They all require different reasons for sanding, but they all require sanding after this pour. So of course we pour with sanding resin. Now, I'm pretty sure I've already said this in this video, but I'm going to reiterate it again. In this video, everything that we've been preparing so far, we have initially filled the holes in the surfboards with resin. Obviously, you didn't see me fill the hole where the fin box was. That was filled with foam because it was quite a large hole in a board, missing foam. But this board here was not missing any foam on the nose, it was only damaged fiberglass. Same down by the tail, only damaged fiberglass, not missing any foam, and same in the middle here. The same can be said for the tail on this fish that we have also filled with resin. There is no foam missing, they're just small fractures and damage to the glass. So we're filling those holes with resin, but something like this, we are definitely not filling this with resin. This will be filled with the 2-part expanding PU foam. So if you're new to the channel and haven't watched one of my videos before, I would encourage you to go back into my catalog a little bit, and I do have videos talking about filling holes with resin versus filling holes with foam. I even have a very specific video on the 2-part pour foam itself. So I just want to put that out there. I don't want you to watch these videos of repairing a poly board and then go and fix your own board using my technique that we're looking at here today, but working on a repair like this and filling this giant hole with resin. That is not something we do. It's not something I recommend or encourage. And yeah, you can check out some of my other videos to see how I would tackle a ding like this.
Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm. Everybody calm down. No, God. No, God, please, no. 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 No.